He missed the target. Once. The crowd laughed. One guy even yelled, "Go back to Buckingham Palace, boy!" But what none of them knew was that this quiet man once trained the army's elite snipers. And when he finally took aim again, every jaw in that field dropped. Before we reveal what happened next, hit that like button and drop a comment below telling us where in the world you're watching from. Now let's get into it. Wiltshire had a certain kind of silence in late spring, one made not of absence but restraint. The hedgerows held their breath, while tractors groaned quietly in the distance. The sky stayed politely overcast, as if even the weather knew today wasn't about drama. It was about tradition. Sergeant Colin Rourke didn't expect anyone to notice him as he stepped out of his car onto the packed dirt verge of the county fairgrounds. He wore a navy fleece, plain jeans and walking boots, still dusted from a woodland trail. No medals, no beret, no fanfare. Just a middle-aged man with calm eyes and a posture that said everything without saying much at all. The archery range had been set up on the far field, behind the livestock tents and food stalls. Bales of hay marked out shooting lanes. Targets at 30 metres stood like worn-out bullseyes from village fetes long past. There was no formal competition, just sign-up sheets clipped to fold-out tables and volunteers with safety whistles. Colin wandered over to the novice lane without drawing attention. He wrote C. Rourke on the list, picked a club bow from the rack, and quietly asked where to queue. The teenager on duty pointed him to a line of waiting shooters without a second glance. 15 minutes later, he stood at the shooting line, left hand gripping the riser of a borrowed recurve bow, the arrow knocked but unfamiliar. It had been years since he'd fired anything without calibration scopes or wind tables. The fairground breeze tugged at his sleeve as he pulled back, not a clean draw, not perfect form, just steady. The arrow flew wide, not dangerously, just embarrassingly. The wooden shaft buried itself into the hay just left of the target ring, wobbling slightly. A smattering of polite claps followed. Then came the laughter, scattered at first, then bolder. One voice stood out. Maybe he left his aim at Buckingham. It came from a tall man with a salt and pepper buzz cut and a laminated staff badge hanging from his belt. He leaned on the rope barrier with casual authority, smirking at a companion beside him. "Palace guards can't hit a barn door, I told you." The companion chuckled. "That him? Coldstream. Look at the boots. Old habit dies hard." Colin said nothing. He walked forward, retrieved the arrow, and nodded politely to the lane marshal. There was no flicker of irritation, no rebuttal, no glare. Just quiet composure. He stepped back to the line. The fairground crowd milled around behind him, unaware that the man they were chuckling at had once trained army sharpshooters to compensate for wind drift in Afghan mountain passes without digital rangefinders. But today wasn't about that. Today was about stillness, silence, and perhaps something deeper, letting people talk, until the moment came to show them something else. The crowd around the archery field was easygoing, a mix of curious families, hobbyists and teenagers looking for social media content disguised as rural tradition. Straw bales doubled as both benches and barricades, and a small speaker played quiet folk music from someone's phone plugged into a battery pack. Colin stepped back from the line after his second attempt. Better than the first, closer to the outer ring, but still nothing worth applauding. He kept his head low and his hands steady, looping the bowstring back across the frame before resting it on the equipment rack. Behind him, the laughter began to rise again. "Look at that grouping," Fletcher called, loud enough for a dozen people to hear. "My Nan could shoot tighter after 2 sherries." Colin gave no reaction. His back was straight, his steps measured. He retrieved another arrow. A couple of teenagers filming on their phones elbowed each other. One zoomed in and whispered, "He's one of those ceremonial guys, right?" "Yeah," the other replied, "the ones who don't blink. He probably thinks the target's going to salute him back." The teens laughed and kept recording. Fletcher leaned toward a young man in a camo cap standing beside him. "He's not one of the real lot, just palace furniture. You can always tell." The man smirked. "Why's that?" "Because real soldiers don't miss by a mile and keep smiling like it's fine." Colin wasn't smiling, but neither did his face show annoyance. It was as unreadable as it had been when tourists posed beside him for selfies outside St. James's Palace, inches from his face, screaming into phones. He was used to mockery. What they never expected was that it didn't bother him, not even a little. He drew again. This time the arrow clipped the target's white border and stuck. A few claps, one sarcastic cheer. "He's getting warmer! Someone get him a heat-seeking arrow next time!" Fletcher whistled. "You ever serve in a real unit, mate?" Colin let the question hang in the air like a shot not worth taking. Fletcher walked up to the edge of the shooting lane, just close enough to be heard, but not interfere. "Little tip, next time you go for your target, try aiming at it. Helps loads, trust me." Colin met his eyes briefly. "Appreciate it." Fletcher grinned. "You're welcome, guardsman." The use of the word was intentional. Not sergeant, not mate. Guardsman. The lowest enlisted rank in the household division. Colin hadn't been that in over a decade. He didn't correct him. Instead, he turned back toward the line for another round. Farther back in the crowd, an older man leaned on a cane beside a picnic table. He wore a flat cap and a wool coat, despite the warmth of the day. His eyes were narrowed, not in amusement, but in familiarity. He watched the way Colin planted his feet, how he drew with minimal sway, how he breathed in and out, like the arrow didn't matter as much as the process. He didn't laugh. He folded his arms and muttered to the woman beside him, "They think he's a clown in red." The woman tilted her head. "Isn't he one of those palace guards?" The veteran nodded slightly. "He is, but not just." As Colin stepped away from the lane once more, he helped a young boy untangle his bowstring from the fence. No one noticed. No one thanked him. Fletcher, meanwhile, had begun boasting about his own time in the service to a pair of dads near the grill stand. "I did 2 years logistics. Shot better than that at basic. No disrespect to the guards, of course, but they're more about standing straight than shooting straight." The veteran at the picnic bench turned his head slowly. He'd heard that kind of talk before, and he knew what usually came next. After the round of laughter died down and the fair resumed its lazy rhythm, Colin Rourke quietly stepped away from the shooting line. He didn't carry the air of a man embarrassed, nor of someone with a point to prove. He helped a volunteer carry a bundle of spare straw bales to the edge of the fencing. When they thanked him, he simply nodded. He moved chairs back into position near the food stands, even swept up some discarded napkins. He was the type of man people forgot to notice unless they were looking for something to complain about. A young father stood near the snack van, balancing a paper tray of chips and trying to keep his toddler from wandering too close to the fence. He glanced sideways at Colin and asked, "You're one of them palace guards, yeah?" Colin replied without looking up, "Did public duties, mostly training now." "Right," the father nodded, not quite sure what that meant, but sensing it wasn't a conversation to pry into. "Well, that Fletcher lad's a bit of a wind-up, so fair play for not losing your cool." Colin smiled faintly. "Takes more energy than it's worth." Just then, a curious teenage girl, maybe 16, with a notebook clutched in her hand, approached from the nearby hay bale bench. Her phone was clipped to a lanyard, and a local press badge dangled from her hoodie. "Excuse me," she said hesitantly, "are you really in the Royal Guard?" Colin turned to face her. "Was, yes." She bit her lip, unsure. "So, do you actually learn how to shoot? Or is it mostly well, standing around. He didn't laugh, didn't sigh. He only said, "We train every week, just not always where people can see." The girl seemed thoughtful, then said, "Have you ever hit a bullseye before?" Colin chuckled softly, a real one this time. "A few." She smiled and backed off politely, but the exchange hadn't gone unnoticed. Fletcher, never one to let attention slip away too long, raised his voice loud enough to be heard across the nearby benches. "Oi, Buckingham! Still thinking about that flying arrow?" Colin said nothing. He continued helping a young boy fix a loose string on his beginner's bow. Fletcher walked over, bow in hand, and gestured toward the crowd. "How about a little challenge, pal? Later, after the pie contest, you and me. 3 arrows each, no excuses. You in?" The silence that followed wasn't hostile. It was interested. People perked up. A few raised their phones. Even the nearby announcer adjusted his headset. Colin didn't look up right away. He tied a clean knot in the boy's bowstring, double-checked the tension, then looked over at Fletcher and said plainly, "All right." That's all. No bravado, no swagger, just agreement. Fletcher grinned like he'd just won a bet. Finally. Should be fun. Across the field, the elderly veteran who'd been sitting silently near the fencing leaned closer to a man next to him. He didn't smile. He didn't clap. He just murmured, "They're laughing now. That'll change." By mid-afternoon, the Wiltshire Fair had reached its peak. Children darted between tents with painted faces and sticky hands. The smell of roasted meat and caramel hung thick in the breeze. And the town announcer's voice crackled through the old PA system to announce the lineup for the festival's Marksman hour. Next up, we've got a little friendly archery contest between a local volunteer, Mr. Fletcher, and a visitor who's made quite the impression today, Sergeant Colin Rourke. Colin winced at the rank reveal, wondering who'd leaked that. But it was too late to object. The crowd, already restless from the custard pie relay and sack race, buzzed with curiosity. Fletcher arrived at the range with all the subtlety of a marching band. His personal recurve bow gleamed, black carbon with chrome stabilizers, a custom grip, and a pressure button that screamed, "Amazon wish list fulfilled." He wore a polyester shirt with his old battalion patch stitched onto the sleeve, one he hadn't served under since training, but had never let go of. He spun the bow theatrically, then winked at the crowd. "Let's see if the palace poser's got anything in him." Colin walked in from the side. No gear bag, no logoed top. Just a folded club bow under one arm, borrowed from the instructor and strung minutes before, with the help of 2 local lads. It had no attachments, no stabilizer, no sight. Just the clean curve of laminated wood and a string, like something you'd find in the corner of a community centre. He nodded politely at Fletcher, then quietly checked the knock points. No fuss, no drama. The announcer, clearly sensing the contrast, cleared his throat. "Right then, 3 arrows each. Closest combined grouping to centre wins. Audience, you're the judges. Give it a cheer when it's over." Fletcher stepped to the line. The target sat 30 yards away, a clean paper face on a hay bale backed by plywood. He drew back with the practiced flair of someone who'd spent hours perfecting the image, if not the technique. The string twanged. First arrow, left quadrant, inside the red. The crowd clapped. Second arrow, slightly right, still respectable. Third, he held the draw a little longer, squinting dramatically before releasing, just outside the yellow ring. He stepped back with a flourish. "Not bad for a part-timer," he called out. The crowd chuckled. Colin stepped up. Not a word, just a breath. He drew the bow casually, no excessive anchoring, no performance. Released. The arrow flew clean and landed wide, just outside the red. A few laughs scattered across the field. "He's worse than we thought," someone snorted. Fletcher leaned toward the crowd. "Think he forgot the targets that way." The second shot came quickly, also wide but mirrored on the opposite side. "Wind," someone joked, "blowing from Buckingham." Even the announcer gave a nervous chuckle. The veteran didn't laugh. He leaned forward and spoke softly, almost to himself. "He's measuring the wind." Nobody heard it. Nobody cared. Third arrow. Colin drew, then held. A child coughed somewhere in the crowd. A gust tugged the flags near the booth. He exhaled and released. The arrow struck just shy of the centre yellow. Not enough to win, not enough to impress, but different, clean, measured. He stepped back, nodded once at the range marshal, and handed the bow over with both hands. Fletcher raised both arms and turned to the crowd. "Well, folks, what can I say? You don't need bearskin hats when you've got dead-eye focus." A few people clapped. Most just watched. Something about the moment didn't feel as definitive as Fletcher had hoped. The announcer called it a fun warm-up and moved on to introduce the next event. But murmurs had started. Because that last arrow, it looked deliberate. Not lucky. Deliberate. After the mock battle ended, the fair began to drift back into its rhythm. Face painters reopened shop, the candy floss machine whirred back to life, and a folk trio resumed their performance near the cider tent. But at the archery range, something lingered. A pause. A second glance. Colin didn't go anywhere. He knelt beside a crate of spare arrows, helping a boy adjust the fletching on a practice shaft. Calm as ever, sleeves rolled up, posture relaxed. Like he hadn't just been publicly mocked for sport. The sun broke through the clouds for a moment, casting warm squares of light across the field. In that brief illumination, the lines around Colin's eyes deepened, weathered from squinting across desert ranges and highland fog alike. His hands moved with a confidence that spoke of thousands of repetitions, thousands of corrections, thousands of moments where precision meant everything. There was a time, years back, when he'd taught new recruits how to settle their breathing in the highland winds. He remembered one particular lad, trembling hands, good eyes, terrible posture, who couldn't hit the broadside of a barn on his first day. 6 weeks later, that same recruit had qualified top of his class. Colin had said nothing then either, just nodded once the way he always did when something met the standard. Not exceeded it, simply met it. Because excellence wasn't exceptional in his world. It was the baseline. A memory flickered across his mind as his fingers worked on the boy's arrow, kneeling in the wet heather before dawn, teaching a squad of nervous Royal Marines how wind affects trajectory at distance. "You don't fight the elements," he'd told them. "You read them, you work with them, then you adjust accordingly." It was the same with people, he supposed. Fletcher strutted nearby, lapping up compliments from a few onlookers still caught in the show. "Like I said, pretty gear doesn't make a shooter. But hey, at least he showed up." But some people had stopped laughing. That final arrow Colin had released stuck in their minds, not just because it hit close, but because of how it landed. Clean. No overcorrection. No luck. Just precision. Near the admin table, the event's co-coordinator, a former Territorial Army logistics man named Ron, tapped through a list of participants on his tablet, checking scores for the upcoming awards announcement. His eyes paused when he saw Colin's name again. Something about it tugged at his memory. He squinted, opened a browser tab, searched the name Sergeant Colin Rourke. The second result down made his jaw slacken. He turned the screen toward the announcer beside him, whispering. The announcer blinked, then reread it slowly. "Wait, this guy ran the sniper instructor cadre at Sandhurst?" Ron nodded, voice hushed. He was head of precision training for years, helped rewrite the advanced field marksmanship protocols. The announcer looked over toward the archery line, where Colin was now helping a young girl adjust her stance. "And he's out here missing targets on purpose?" Ron nodded again, slower this time. "Measuring the wind, all right." They exchanged a look. The announcer's hand went to his mic, but he hesitated, then thought better of it. Let it play out. Meanwhile, Fletcher tossed his water bottle aside and wandered over to Colin. "You all right, guard boy?" he asked with exaggerated cheer. "Hope we didn't bruise too much pride out there." Colin stood up, dusted off his knees. "All good." "You shoot better with a bayonet on the end of it?" Fletcher grinned. Colin gave a small, patient smile. "We try to avoid those." Behind them, a few of the teens with phones were still rewatching the footage of Colin's final shot, slowing it down, zooming in. One of them, a tall boy in a rugby hoodie, muttered, "That wasn't luck." Another added, "Did you see how he held the bow? My coach said only competition-level archers do that breathing technique." Ron, the organizer, quietly passed through the group and whispered something to one of the range marshals. It wasn't loud, but it spread, first to the marshals, then to a nearby volunteer, then to the cider tent. The message moved like smoke. By the time the final round of shooting began, a quiet hum had overtaken the event. Not tension, just a feeling that something wasn't what it had seemed. And all of it centered around the man in the plain polo, calmly tying down target netting as if no one had said a word to him all day. By late afternoon, the crowd had thickened again around the archery booth. It was the final arrow demonstration, just for fun, the announcer said, though there was a murmur beneath his voice, like even he knew something bigger was coming. Fletcher strutted up first, bow in hand, his name already called. He stood centre stage like it was a televised event. "All right, folks, let's wrap this up with a little style," he said, drawing his string with a flourish. His first two arrows had landed cleanly earlier, but now, with the crowd's shifting mood and attention glancing toward Colin, something about his posture seemed off, too stiff, too self-aware. He exhaled, released. And the arrow thudded into the outer ring, not terrible, but not the centre he'd hoped would secure his pride. A few polite claps. Someone coughed. "Next up, Sergeant Colin Rourke," the announcer called, finally using his full title. That alone made Fletcher's head turn. Colin stepped up quietly, still in the same unbranded polo. No gloves, no accessories, just the borrowed club bow and 3 standard arrows. He took his time adjusting his footing, checking the line with quiet calculation. The world narrowed for Colin in that moment. The fairground sounds faded. The candy floss machines whir, children's laughter, murmured conversations, all of it receding like tide pulling away from shore. What remained was the feel of the bow in his hand, the tension of the string against his fingertips, and the whisper of air currents against his cheek. Time seemed to slow, each second stretching out like toffee being pulled. His mind flashed back to that compound in Helmond, kneeling in the dust for 6 hours, waiting for the signal. His spotter beside him, both of them still as stones while sweat traced pathways down their necks. The moment when everything had depended on one clean shot, one breath, one perfect alignment of skill, calculation and timing. This wasn't life or death. There were no consequences beyond a moment's pride or embarrassment, but the process, the discipline that never changed. Whether on a distant ridge, protecting your unit, or at a village fair, proving nothing to anyone, the fundamentals remained sacred. The difference was, at Sandhurst and in the field, he'd needed to hit the target. Here at the fair, with whispers spreading about who he really was, he needed to decide whether to hit it, whether to make a point, or let the moment pass. Someone near the front whispered, "That's him. He trained snipers." Colin knocked the arrow. Someone else murmured, "Sandhurst, years ago, led the Marksman course." Fletcher's face lost a little colour. He folded his arms tighter across his chest, like trying to brace himself. Colin didn't seem to hear any of it. His eyes were fixed on the target. The wind had picked up slightly, barely enough to notice unless you were looking for it. He did. He adjusted accordingly. A pause, a breath, and then the release. The arrow sliced the air and landed with a hollow knock. Center. Dead center. The crowd gasped. Even Fletcher flinched. The announcer froze mid-comment, mouth still open. Then he cleared his throat. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have ourselves a bullseye." The silence that followed wasn't stunned. It was reverent. Colin stepped back, handed the bow to a nearby volunteer, and gave a nod. Someone asked, "Wait, why didn't you tell anyone who you were?" Colin turned slightly, his tone calm and clear. "Because I didn't come to win anything. I just needed the practice." The rugby-shirted teen who had filmed the first round stepped forward. "Sir, are you really the guy who trained the elite marksman?" Colin smiled gently. "That's what they tell me." Fletcher remained frozen on the sideline, the swagger drained from his face. He opened his mouth once, but no sound came. Eventually he forced a laugh. Guess I underestimated a bit." Colin offered a hand. "No worries. Happens." Fletcher took it, but the shake was short, sheepish. The applause that followed wasn't explosive. It was warm, earned. As Colin walked back toward the crate to help collect the spent arrows, a little girl tugged on her mum's sleeve. "Is he famous?" Her mum replied, "No, love, just really, really good." And somehow that felt like the highest compliment of all. After the crowd began to disperse, Fletcher hovered awkwardly near the target line, fidgeting with his arrow pouch like it might somehow explain away the miss. He glanced over at Colin a few times, unsure whether to speak. Eventually he walked over, slower now, more like a man returning someone's wallet than approaching a fellow archer. "Hey," he said, voice low, "I just wanted to say, yeah, I didn't know." Colin turned, relaxed but attentive. "Didn't know what?" "That you trained Sandhurst, that you were, actually a shooter." Colin gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. "You didn't need to know." Fletcher scratched the back of his neck. "Still, I talked a lot. Bit of an idiot." Colin extended his hand. "Water under the bridge." They shook, firm, respectful. No fanfare. Near the equipment table, the older veteran from earlier stepped forward now, finally making his way toward them. He walked with a slight limp, the kind that didn't need explaining to those who understood. "You know," he said, voice weathered but sharp, "I thought I recognized your stance." Colin smiled. "You did?" The man chuckled softly. "Sandhurst. Prone adjustment module. 03. You were the guy who said, if your elbows are floating, you'll shoot like you're guessing." Colin laughed. "I still say that." "I remember." The vet offered a handshake. "You taught me more in 10 minutes than my last instructor did in a week." Colin looked genuinely humbled. "Thanks for saying that." Nearby, the teenager who'd been filming earlier glanced at his phone. He hovered a second, then approached Colin. "Hey, sir. I recorded you earlier when you missed, for TikTok." Colin waited. The boy held up the screen. "I was going to post it, but I deleted it. It's not funny anymore." Colin nodded slowly. "You did the right thing." The boy looked up. "You don't even seem mad." Colin gave him a half smile. "Why would I be? Everyone learns something new at these events." The boy gave a respectful nod, then turned back toward the group, noticeably quieter. As the sun began to set, long shadows stretched across the grass. Colin helped fold up the plastic chairs without being asked. He rolled the target stands back to the equipment trailer with a volunteer who'd been skeptical of him hours earlier. No celebration, no ego, just small, steady tasks, same as always. A little girl ran up, no older than 6, and stood at his side. "Are you really a royal guard?" she asked. Colin knelt, so he was at her eye level. "That's just the uniform," he said gently. "What matters is what you learn before you wear it." She looked confused for a moment, then smiled and skipped back to her mother. The older veteran clapped Colin once on the shoulder. "We need more like you." Colin simply replied, "They're out there. They're just not always loud." With the field mostly cleared and the sun dipping low behind the trees, Colin tucked his hands into his jacket pockets and began the walk back to his car. Nobody followed, but everybody watched, not because they had to, but because now they understood. Would you have laughed at Colin after that first miss? Do you think people respect quiet professionals enough in today's world? And what would you have said if you were in that field, watching all this unfold? Drop your answers in the comments. We read every single one of them. If this story moved you, or changed how you see those in uniform, give it a like and subscribe for more powerful Royal Guard stories like this one. And don't forget to hit the bell icon so you never miss our daily uploads. Share this video with someone who still thinks those red coats are just for standing still and looking sharp. Our other Royal Guard stories should be popping up on your screen now. Check those out next. And we'll see you tomorrow, same time, with another story that proves real discipline doesn't need to shout.